Good.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Harish. He has a very interesting job title. So we're going to set the scene because I have an 18-year-old daughter. I have an 18-year-old event as well. But I thought TikTok was a music thing for teenage girls.
I mean, it's a good way to start off this panel. Why don't we just ask a few people what they think, right? Just show of hands. Does any of you use TikTok or watch videos on TikTok? Show of hands. I don't see any 18-year-old girls, so I think we may have been disproven.
Okay, but you're the head of sport?
Yes.
And tell us about sport on TikTok.
So sport on TikTok is interesting. I get this question a lot. What does that mean? What is sport on TikTok? What does the head of sport on TikTok actually do? I'm going to avoid that last question for a second. I look at it from the perspective of everything on TikTok is content-based, and the experience that people are having on TikTok is tied to what their interests are. And when you go back to, and I'll actually give you credit for this because in 2019, that is exactly how TikTok was described, right? A place for lip sync and dance content. And yes, teenagers specifically. And so then the question came out, well, what does this mean? Does this mean this is the be all and end all? Or are there more things that TikTok can be? And so that was part of the journey that we went on. And I was thankfully part of that journey. And the idea was, can we make it be a place that can bring all aspects of your interests? So if you are somebody that likes cooking content, could you find that on TikTok? If you're somebody that likes sport, could you find that on TikTok? And could we do it in a way where it's done seamlessly, where you don't have to necessarily seek it out, but it will find you, and then ultimately you can show through interest that you want more. So sport on TikTok is effectively the culmination of growing what was really something really nascent and has actually over time scaled to the point now where our users actually say that they identify sport on TikTok, and it's actually a vertical within TikTok that people identify with.
And so what is the content? You're not showing the full games?
No. So we're not a traditional broadcaster. So you wouldn't expect to see the full games. Now we have had instances where some partners have said to us, we'd like to test a few things. We may not have a broadcast agreement in a specific market, and rather than being dark, we'd rather actually try a few things. We're also trying new revenue models. So that's happened, and so we've had live content show up in that way. But where I would say we excel is sort of, think of it as like the all the build up to the game. And if the game is, say, 2 hours on average, people wait maybe a whole week for that game, if it's football. And there's lots of examples. Basketball is much more frequent. There's a lot of examples of it. But let's just say before you get to the game, there's a lot of dead time. What are people doing? I think that's where fandom is really taking over. Most people are actually talking about their anticipation of what they expect to come from that game. They're creating videos associated with that. If you're a broadcaster, you're spending a lot of time shooting promo content and actually putting that on TikTok. If you are a user or a fan, you're effectively saying, this is a great opportunity for me to deliver my hot take. Because one day I want to be a pundit, and I could actually do this because I have an audience available to me. So there's lots of ways you do it before the game. Now, obviously, you then tune into the game, and then right after the final whistle, now there's an opportunity to re-engage. Now, I don't know if a lot of you were following the US Open or saw what Coco Gauff did. So she literally, right as soon as she won the tournament and she the broadcast cut, she asked for her phone, and she shot a TikTok from the court. She's a huge fan of the platform. It was not something we requested. It's something that she did. And she did it because for her, it was a way for her to kind of showcase to her fans that this was something that meant something to her. And it's a platform where, like I said, right as soon as the final whistle goes, now you've got all the stuff that happens after that. It's the recaps. It's if you're a league or a federation, it's the highlights. There's a lot of ways. And so I hope that gives you a sense of it, but it shows up in different ways. But we're sort of like connecting the dots between the main event and everything else that happens around in sport.
Well, there is a question about, whether people have 90 minutes to watch, plus half time and all that kind of, and the build up and stuff. Do people have, and is the next generation going to be able to watch 90-minute shows or 90-minute live games? Give us some of the stats. I always love hearing from TikTok. You got some really silly numbers, right? Silly being a good thing.
Silly numbers, yes. I'll give you a stat that actually speaks specifically to what you just talked about. It's interesting because for me, I always say take every stat with a pinch of salt because you can cut data different ways. But we polled TikTok users, and 59% of them said they prefer to watch sports content on TikTok as opposed to in its full form. And for a lot of people, they're saying, wait a minute, is that concerning? Because are we talking about maybe a shift in behavior, or what is this? And the more we dig into this, I'd say, if you think about this as a fan, and if a lot of folks here are from different age groups, but I would say that the lack of access to content that was outside of the live window was something that a lot of us probably can relate to. I can relate to it myself. There was no TikTok when I was growing up. And so a big part of that experience was exclusively, what is a broadcaster doing before the live game, obviously the live event, and then right after, maybe something that's basically shoulder content. And you really didn't have much. You had newspapers, for those that even know what those are, and you had a few other things, right? And so that was it. That was the experience of sport. You kind of had to do the most with that. Now imagine a world where you say to someone, you get to now have this all-you-can-eat buffet, and you get to decide how much you want to engage with this content and how much of this content you think is appealing, because you may not find the on-field stuff really interesting, but you may actually find the stuff that's happening off the court or off the field way more interesting. You might find sneaker culture super interesting. You might find other things way more interesting. So what I've seen with that stat is there's probably way more participation now and consumption of sport than ever before. And you've now got probably more people that identify as a fan of sport, even if it's tangential, even if it's really, really at the surface level, because they like celebrities, and celebrities attend sporting events, and they get to watch them on TikTok. Now they view that as, I'm watching sport.
Are you able to throw up any numbers, any viewership numbers, any?
Well, not viewership numbers.
Reach?
We've been fairly public, so we're over a billion user platform. We have over 150 monthly actives in the US and over 150 million monthly actives in Europe. So when you think about size and scale, I mean, we've been fairly public with that. I don't know if you were looking for something else, but
No. I just love hearing the wow number,
Yeah.
the wow numbers. And so this time last year we had your global head of music on stage.
Yes.
Global head of sport. And he was talking a lot about engagement, and the this thing about the measurement for music was about the number of creations.
yeah.
How are you measuring engagement for the sports industry?
So it's a really good question. We're sort of solving different things. I think when you've got this moniker or association of being a place for music, you don't have to prove to anybody that you actually come with credentials, right? It's very different in sport. I kind of harken back to that original time when nobody associated TikTok with sport. And so what do? How do you actually overcome that? I think the first step of that is to start to encourage the community of sports contributors to become part of TikTok, right? So that starts with rights holders, and then it goes down to broadcasters, and then you have athletes, you have federations, you have teams, and then you have the fans. So everybody is a contributor. And when you think about that in the context of sport, how do you get all these disparate groups to really invest in and show up? So for us, it's start with the supply, then have enough people find the content. So either find it for them or help them find it. So search, which is something that a lot of folks are not maybe paying as much attention to on TikTok, it's not just the experience of scrolling and looking at the For You feed, which is teeing up the content after content after content. It's less of a lean back experience. It's this active search. You go in as you would on, say, any search engine, and you actually search for what you're looking for, and you get served up videos that are aligned with that search. So that's another area where you now have the supply of content meeting the demand and the interest. And ultimately, if we do those two things right, then we will officially have an association with sports. So it's very different than music, I would say, but there's of course a lot of benefits in having the music layer, kind of overarching.
Absolutely, and I think you're talking about the short form content and what have you. Which sports are you working with? Which leagues? Which brands? What does it look like?
I mean, this is going to sound cliche. We're working with everybody. I think we're just working with everybody differently. Not every sports partner that we work with has the same set of goals. Some partners have commercial goals, like purely commercial goals, because they are at a scale now where the biggest thing for them is, how do I take this massive audience and what do I do with it in a digital sphere, and specifically what do I do with it in TikTok, right? Some are actually looking for either a validation against the competitor set, because there's a lot of competition right now with regards to whose attention can you grab. And so there's a value in being able to stand out and frankly being relevant in an audience in TikTok that is very much front and center for them and is something that they're hearing constantly. So that's a different set. There's also a group, frankly, of emerging sports. And you probably have seen some of this. I'll mention like tech ball is an example of one. Pickleball, if you're in the US, if you're anywhere else, nobody seems to care, it feels like. But these are examples of sports where folks are actually starting to convene and saying, we don't have to just conform to traditional norms. I don't have to be a fan of a stick and ball sport that's traditional. I can, frankly, be pushing for something else. So they're also looking for an audience and they're looking for awareness that way. So it's different groups, and I didn't name names specifically because it actually doesn't make sense at this point, because we are really speaking to a really wide breadth.
And I know we were talking about this earlier, but a lot of people see TikTok as being a way for athletes and teams to be able to connect and build those connections.
Yeah.
What success stories are you starting to see on that leverage?
Look, I'd say this from maybe it's a very different angle, right? I'll take a different approach to this. I think the biggest thing that TikTok can be for athletes specifically is a place where their legacy can live on long after they're not athletes anymore. And I think that comes down to brand building. I think it comes down to them having an audience that they can identify, and then I can identify with them, and then they can relate to them in a way where they have access to them. A perfect example of this, I mentioned Coco earlier, Suni Lee. So during, you probably remember this, Simone Biles was, dropped out, stepped away for a lot of good reasons. And in her place was Suni Lee, who stepped in, ended up winning the gold. The first thing she did after the podium was run to her room, and she went live on TikTok. And she didn't do that because anybody asked her to do it. She sort of did it because that's what she wanted to do. The athletes in the Olympic Village spent a lot of time telling us about the Olympic Village beds. I think you guys all probably remember that. And they started telling you about what it's like to go and eat at the cafeteria. This was obviously an Olympics that didn't have any fans in attendance. So for us, the way we think about this is everyone's a storyteller in their own way. Everyone's got their own side, and people are not just athletes. They happen to be fantastic athletes, but they also probably have a whole host of other capabilities. Some are comedic, some have culinary talents, some are actually probably very fashion forward. There's a lot of aspects there that, frankly, they don't get to show off. They don't get to, showcase. And this is kind of what TikTok has been for a lot of folks. It's been this opportunity to be themselves. I don't know. So I noticed this is an NBA table, so I have to give them a shout out. I've seen a lot of videos from Serge Ibaka and his amazing cooking, and those things have been following me around on TikTok. And it's, to be honest, I was a fan of Ibaka even before this, but as somebody who was, who's not like at the upper echelon, candidly relative to his peers, like from a notoriety perspective, he became he blew up in a big way. And actually, that's kind of amazing to see, because you can see the value of being able to have your brand not just associated with what you do on the court or on the field, but it's amazing to see this person now transcend and now become an interviewer and become somebody who's actually really engaged. So that's an example of how we're doing it.
And you just were big supporters of the Women's World Cup. We had Jane Fernandez with us yesterday,
Yes.
telling a wonderful story of that. And you know, women's sport is a theme throughout the whole of this week. But tell us about the partnership with the World Cup, and what was the purpose behind it? Was it a branding purpose? What was the purpose for you?
So I think a few things. So one, we tend to be very deliberate about where we feel we need to be associated with something. We don't have an awareness challenge, right? TikTok is fairly well known. The question then becomes, why are we going to be on the ground, for example, in Australia and New Zealand in this particular relationship? So one of the biggest focuses for us as a platform is DE&I. We really believe in it. We look at it from the perspective of less about, hey, you're supporting women's sport, but actually women's sport deserves the podium, deserves to finally be recognized for what it has been for a very long time, but has never really received the attention. So it's a really big, frankly, for us, it's a chance for us to kind of walk the walk. We've been talking about it a lot, and lots of organizations do, but it was a chance for us to say, we're going to put a stake in the ground. We're going to be physically present in Australia, but more than that, we're going to support the women's game in a way that TikTok has never been able to, outside of, say, what we did with, there's a bit of a through line here, the Rugby Six Nations, what we did with Burnley Women's. There's a lot of examples. If you're paying attention, we're doing a lot of things that are connected. So this is not a one-off. This was not like a chance for us to sort of just show up and do something. You know, there was a lot of questions around that, whether or not, you know, the tournament itself would be successful and everything else. But that had nothing to do with our decision. We were always committed, and that's part one. Part two is it allowed us to shine a light on something that we have tremendous conviction about, which is that at some point, we will get to a place where and Jane Fernandez talked about this, we will stop calling it women's sport.
Yep.
And we'll just call it sport. And at the end of the day, the best player will be the best player. And if we can do something small in that respect, and this is a part of that, then we've done something good.
You haven't mentioned Wrexham yet. I'm actually watching this. I mean, it is a brilliant show, and I have to say the sponsorship is awesome. But I would have loved to have sat in the original pitch for that when Wrexham came to you and said we would TikTok sponsor a North Welsh football team.
Yes.
But so I mean, on you got the World Cup, you've got Wimbledon, you've got the NFL. What can you share any results? Can you share any outcomes? What does a win look like for TikTok?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example of a win, the recent one. So we mentioned the Women's World Cup, and a lot of the talk has been about our association. One of the best things that came out of it actually was we set up a creator program specifically in partnership with FIFA. And the idea was to say, we don't want this to be sort of your run-of-the-mill, creators fly in and they go to games. I mean, that's great, but that's not really exceptional. And so how can we do things differently? So we sort of figured it out, we put our heads together. We said, if we're going to do this, they have to be able to get exceptional access. They have to be able to do things that no fan can do, frankly, that they could have never done in their wildest dreams. So 18 creators from around the world, from a lot of the participating nations, as well as some that weren't, that were just coming from supporting nations, flew in, and we basically built a program where they got to go to these places, stadiums, inside stadiums, outside, and they got to see what that life was like, what it looked like to be in a pre-match day, what it looked like to be in closed practice, things that like you just would never see, right? And again, this was all done with oversight. So FIFA was on board and said we approve, and they obviously had the ability to say this is okay, these are the rules, and so this is different because this is not typical. We would have been just happy if that was it, because that's a pretty big win. We were really lucky because at the same time, we were looking at, and this is sort of like the secondary outcome that comes out of these partnerships, is when we can build connective tissue with others who are looking to do more and scale things up. So I think in the room we have somebody from Unilever. He'll tell you all about it, hopefully. We did something with Unilever around, frankly, growing the scale of women's sport as it pertained to the Unilever brand. And so they became tied to our initiatives. Similarly, we worked with Coke around this creator program. And Coke said, we want to work directly with the creators. Can you help facilitate this? This was a massive win for the creators because the creators did not expect any of this to turn into a commercial outcome for them. And it did. And it was a huge, and again, it was a bonus. We had never anticipated that. And so just to give you a sense of like some of these things, so for us, the win is actually, we go in with all good intent, and the outcome, yeah, content is great, but what about all the other things that matter? So that was a huge win.
I think we've also got Visa here. We've got Visa, we've got Unilever, we've got Coke. They're all just,
Yes.
You have to take them all out for lunch now, don't you?
At some point, yes. Yes.
So it's a very exciting time, obviously, and there's a lot of people here, sports and non-sports people, that I'm sure are very keen to understand how do they work with TikTok? How can they leverage their presence on TikTok? And maybe there's some advice you can give on areas like that.
Look, there are definitely teams and folks on the sports team who are better equipped to give you advice. I don't think I even have as many followers as you do on TikTok, which, by the way, Jasper is being very, he's not being very, he hasn't been forthright about how successful he's been on TikTok. And
641 followers is not successul.
It's a lot more successful than I've been, and your daughter's doing fantastic, by the way.
63,000. So don't tell Gotham this morning that I've got 14 followers on YouTube, and they're all me. But how do people work with you? How do people work with TikTok Sport?
So thankfully we have a system for this. We have teams that are dedicated to success, and that could take a variety of different forms. If you are an individual, right, we will help you with figuring out what do best practices look like for you in your category, right? So not everybody is going to want to create or be capable of creating content in sport specifically, because you may or may not be an athlete. You may or may not, frankly, have a sport inclination. Maybe you have other inclinations and you want to do other things, right? And so we usually will pair folks with somebody from that sector, and we'll say, if you're looking to be somebody who's a creator, say, maybe you have comedic intent. Maybe that's what you want to develop. Maybe you like sketch versus stand-up versus something else. There's a lot of different ways to skin that cat, and we'll actually build the program for you. So that's one. Second thing is, we'll actually tie your actual success to a cohort. So you'll be part of a cohort of similar, like-minded. So you're not going to be just swimming in the ocean. I mean, it might feel like that, but we try our best not to have that be the case. And so we work with cohorts, and we actually then do trainings, and we'll actually routinely give you a best practice handbook. We'll check in, and again, as you get bigger and bigger and bigger as a platform, this gets much more difficult. So this is a lot of individuals, a lot of bandwidth that we commit to doing this. So this is not one of those things, Jasper, where you could say, tell me how I can go and get viral tomorrow, right? I definitely don't know, because I haven't been able to pull it off myself. But I think one of the things
Just crossing that question out.
Yeah, let's get rid of that right now. But I think the opportunity to tell you that, one, being super authentic about who you are and your brand, and just being really, really okay with showing up. I think that's the first thing. Second thing is, I don't think waiting any longer is going to change anything. TikTok is a thing, and thankfully, and everyone seems to be on board. Find your voice. I think it's an opportunity to do that. I think number three, the best thing I like about it is it's sort of like, probably for you and I, very valuable. It sort of hides all your failures, right? Success is amplified, failures are not, right? So if you throw a bunch of bombs, that's fine. It doesn't really mean anything. If you throw out a banger, everyone's going to talk about it. You're going to become instantly well known. So that's the beauty of the system. It allows anyone to get there. So hopefully that gives enough people comfort to consider it.
So I must say, you do have one of the cool jobs, certainly amongst all the various tracks that we have here. And so talk about a lot of what you've been doing, and where's TikTok and sport heading? What does the future have in store?
I do have one of the coolest jobs. I'm very, very aware of the privilege, right, and the responsibility. So, and I love sport, so this is sort of, not hard, right?
Do people invite you to dinner parties just so you can be cool?
Yeah, I don't think they're inviting me because I'm cool, but I think it's a different issue. Yeah, exactly. I don't think the transitive property works in this case. I would look at it from the perspective of where we're really focused on are, I would say, three key areas, right? One is, and a few folks I've had a few chats with a few folks, but TikTok Shop is massive for us and a big focus area for us. For those that know, we've had tremendous success in this region, specifically Indonesia with TikTok Shop. That has in many ways spurred the interest to scale that and bring that to the United States. We're now live in the United States. We're also in the UK. So you sort of have TikTok Shop really laying ground in massive e-commerce markets. It's not going to be e-commerce as you probably have historically experienced it. It's going to be much more tied to the video experience, tied to natural behaviors. If you see a video from a brand you really like, are you going to want to engage with it because of what's in the video, or potentially because you like that brand and you maybe now want to transact because you've been thinking about actually turning intent, right? Turning interest into intent and then action. So that's sort of the arc, right? So, and it's a big area of focus. The second one that we'll spend a lot of time in is longer video. And longer video is, for us, in a world of 1 to 3 minute video. And so, or 3 minute or longer, so 3 to 5 minute video as well. And, in sport, I'll give you a perfect example. So TIFO, which does a lot of explanations and does a lot of, if you really want to nerd out on football, TIFO does a lot of really great stuff. All their videos are extremely long if you're used to a 15-second clip. But for somebody who wants to consume longer form content and then spend that time digesting a much more, an explanation of something that's much more complex than you can cover in 30 seconds or a minute, this is the platform for that. And so now you're allowing yourselves to say, let me allow storytellers of different forms find their home, and let me allow different formats to kind of sit side by side. So you don't have to kind of pick and choose. You can watch the quick stuff, but you can also watch stuff that's a little more long form. So that's the direction we're going in as well, something that's coming as well in sport. And then I mentioned it earlier, but search. Search is really getting interesting. And I'd encourage you to go and do some more research on your own. A lot of it is generational. So a lot of it is, younger folks are going to TikTok exclusively to search. And they're using it as an alternative to the search engine. Why? Because if you want to figure out what are the best places to go and eat in Singapore, a curation of videos as a set of results apparently is much easier, because you could see the locations, you could see what the venue looks like, and then you could get a review right there. This is feedback we're getting, right, real time. And so that behavior is now really starting to grow, and we're seeing that kind of shift more and more. Now, it doesn't mean folks are not doing the lean back thing with the For You feed. They are definitely doing that, but they're now going also more active. So you're sort of seeing both of those things happening at the same time. Expect that to be something that evolves. And in sport, imagine that data will start to find a way where we'll start integrating that into the process. So a fan could search for something and then find something that's relevant to them in the sport world.
Oh, it's a fantastic. I mean, it really is about collaboration and partnership and embracing the sport's not just broadcasting. So look, we've talked about shorter attention spans. We've talked about emerging sports, but also leading sports as well. You're working with every sport. We talked about DEI. We talked about how important creators are, and that's been a real theme today. Talk about partnerships, and we got three, at least one of your partners coming up on stage next. We talked about creative flexibility. Talk about and how much support you're giving the creative community. It sounds fascinating as well. But yeah, so I will say, Harish, thank you so much for joining us today. Cool job, ladies and gentlemen. The head of TikTok Sport, Harish.
Thank you.